Journalism is the only mass media that democracy absolutely requires, so much that it is specifically protected by the U.S. Constitution. To understand where journalism, in all its print and electronic forms, is today, it's useful to explore the often partisan and sensationalistic history of newspapers, the legacy form of journalism that still represents the bulk of local news coverage in many communities. Yet it's also important to look beyond the printed page, to see how journalists took this craft and adapted it to the big screen, to the airwaves, and to the internet. In this chapter, we will look at how the profession of journalism and the technology of gathering and sharing news and the economics of the news business have shaped one another over the last 300 years. Human beings have always valued news, but what exactly is it? The textbook defines it as the process by which people gather information and create narrative reports to help one another make sense of events happening around them. The earliest news was passed along orally among families and tribes by community leaders and oral historians. Soon after moving from oral to written form, news shifted from an information source accessible only to elites and local leaders to a mass medium that satisfied a growing audience's hunger for information. Inspired by the European press, American colonists began producing the first newspapers in the late 17th century. The two main types of early papers were the partisan press and commercial shipping news. The partisan press was so named because the papers were sponsored by political parties, politicians, and other partisan groups. The partisan press critiqued the government and disseminated the viewpoint of the political parties that sponsored the newspaper. The partisan press can be considered the forerunner of the modern editorial page and partisan cable news channels, talk radio, and websites. Other newspapers provided information on commercial markets and ships coming in and out of colonial ports, evolving into the modern business section. The first colonial newspaper, Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, was published on September 25, 1690, by Boston printer Benjamin Harris, but it was banned after just one issue for its negative view of British rule. The early 1700s saw the establishment of other newspapers, including Benjamin Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette, which many historians regard as the best of the colonial papers. The Gazette was also the first paper to make money by printing advertisements alongside news. Another significant colonial newspaper, the New York Weekly Journal, was founded in 1733 by the Popular Party, a political group that opposed British rule. Journal articles include attacks on the royal governor of New York. In 1734, the paper's printer, John Peter Zenger, was arrested for seditious libel when one of his writers defamed a public official's character in print. Represented by famed Philadelphia lawyer Andrew Hamilton, Zenger won his case the following year. The Zenger decision helped lay a foundation, the right of a democratic press to criticize public officials, for the First Amendment to the Constitution, adopted as part of the Bill of Rights in 1791. By 1765, the American colonies boasted about 30 weekly or monthly newspapers, with the first daily paper starting in 1784. But even the largest of these papers rarely reached a circulation of 1,500. Just like early books, newspaper readership was largely confined to educated or wealthy men who controlled politics and commerce, and who could afford a newspaper subscription. All that was about to change. In the early 1830s, the newspaper became a mass medium, thanks in part to a cheaper, machine-made paper, the rise of a middle class, increase in literacy rates, and a new steam-powered printing press that could print as many as 4,000 copies every hour. All of these lowered the cost to print the newspaper. But what really turned the tide for newspapers was when New York Sun editor Benjamin Day dropped the price of his newspaper to a single penny. Nearly everyone could afford a cent, and so-called penny papers soon began outselling the 6-cent elite publications previously available. Rather than subscriptions, the Sun relied on newsies, mostly young boys, to stand on street corners and sell the paper. Within 6 months, the Sun had a circulation of 8,000, twice that of its nearest competitor. It wasn't just the price that differentiated the Sun. The newspaper featured stories of local events and scandals, as well as police reports. It also ran serialized stories, where readers could experience the legends of Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone over several issues, which blazed the trail for the current enthusiasm for celebrity news. Penny papers like the Sun also focused on human interest stories, news accounts that focused on the trials and tribulations of the human condition, often featuring ordinary individuals facing extraordinary challenges. Without the funding from political parties like the Partisan press, the penny press relied on sales from readers. To help get them, they also relied on fabricated stories, sensational gossip and rumors, along with deliberate lies that exaggerated or embellished the truth. In many ways, the penny press was the template for today's tabloid papers. The success of the New York Sun spawned a wave of penny papers across the country, including the New York Morning Herald. By 1860, the Herald had nearly 80,000 readers, making it the world's largest daily paper. Ad revenues and circulation for the penny press skyrocketed, expanding the entire newspaper industry. In 1830, there were about 650 weekly and 65 daily papers in the United States, with a circulation of 80,000. By 1840, there were 1,140 weeklies and 140 dailies, with 300,000 readers. The penny press began to shift not only its business model, but the way the news was presented, effectively changing the practice of journalism. While early partisan papers emphasized overt political viewpoints, newspaper owners realized they could attract more readers and make more advertising money by taking a more objective stance, putting news on the front page and moving political opinions to the editorial page. In 1848, the tremendous expansion of the newspaper industry led 6 New York newspapers to form a cooperative agreement to begin the Associated Press, the first major newswire service. The AP relayed news stories and information around the country and the world using telegraph lines, and later radio waves and digital transmissions, to function as a kind of news co-op, with the New York papers providing access to their own stories and those from other newspapers. The AP and other newswires allowed news to travel rapidly, setting the stage for modern journalism in the country. With papers still costing a penny, more people than ever had access to a widening array of news and viewpoints, moving newspapers from the entrepreneurial stage to a true mass medium. The newswire also brought about a new writing style called the inverted pyramid. Developed by Civil War correspondents, inverted pyramid stories were those heavy on facts and light on adverbs and adjectives. Information needed to be transmitted by telegraph, and there was always a chance of the transmission being cut, so the most important information came first, with less significant details later. This style also had the advantage that if editors needed to shorten the story to fit on the printed page, they could just cut from the bottom, without sacrificing the main points of the story. Following the tradition of the New York Sun and the New York Morning Herald, a new brand of papers arose in the late 1800s. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. The two publications ushered in the era of yellow journalism, emphasizing human interest stories, crime news, disasters, scandals, and intrigue, all under large headlines. Another major characteristic was a commitment to exposing corruption in business and government, the foundation for modern investigative journalism. The World and the Journal were in fierce competition for readers, and neither was above manufacturing news events and printing sensationalized stories on crime and sex, complete with faked pictures. One of the biggest publicity stunts was when Pulitzer sent reporter Nellie Bly around the world in 1889, beating the fictional Phileas Fogg's journey in the Jules Verne novel Around the World in 80 Days by 8 days. The term yellow journalism came from the World and the Journal's battle to publish the first popular cartoon strip, The Yellow Kid, which shuttled back and forth between papers in the mid to late 1890s. While the yellow journalism era has been heavily criticized for its sensationalism, along with investigative reporting, the papers introduced newspaper elements still valued by readers today, including the advice column and feature stories. It also inspired the founding of the prestigious Pulitzer Prizes that recognize quality writing, reporting, and research. Throughout the mid-1800s, the more objective a newspaper appeared on its front page, the more readers, and thus advertisers, it could attract. Wire services were trying to satisfy newspaper clients across the country, striving for impartiality by presenting facts and allowing readers to interpret them. But at the same time, yellow journalism was creating an image problem for journalism. The idea of an impartial news model was reinvented by Adolph Oakes when he bought the New York Times in 1896. Oakes and his editors rebuilt the paper on substantial news coverage and provocative editorial pages. The Times distanced itself from the yellow press by downplaying sensational stories in favor of documenting major events and issues. Rather than try to initially lure working and middle-class readers from the World and the Journal, Oakes marketed the Times as a high-culture choice for more affluent and educated readers. Then he dropped the paper's price to a penny, causing middle-class readers to gravitate to the paper as a status marker for the educated and well-informed. Between 1898 and 1899, circulation rose from 2,500 to 7,500. The more scientific approach to news reporting is called objective journalism, a modern style of journalism that distinguishes factual reports from opinion columns, presenting a neutral attitude when covering events and seeking out competing points of view for balanced coverage. While all humans have biases, good objective journalists don't reveal them in their writing. Meanwhile, Joseph Pulitzer was approaching Columbia University in New York about setting up the first journalism school. Despite the millions the newspaper publisher was offering, the reputation of journalism was so tarnished by Pulitzer and Hearst's yellow press that it took several years of convincing for Columbia to set up their journalism school. In the meantime, another Columbia took the honor as the country's first journalism school. The School of Journalism at the University of Missouri in Columbia was founded in 1908. By the 1920s, though, it seemed people may have had enough of objective journalism, wondering if its impartial approach was enough. Objective journalism doesn't tell readers what to think, just what to think about. And maybe they needed help understanding complex national and global developments. Enter interpretive journalism, a style of journalism that involves analyzing and exploring key issues and events and placing them in a broader historical context. It was developed, in part, due to poor reporting of the causes of the Great War. Editor and columnist Walter Lippmann insisted that objectivity should serve as journalism's foundation, but the press could do more. He ranked the 3 press responsibilities as to make a current record, to make a running analysis of that record, and, on the basis of both, suggest plans. While journalism started with newspapers, it certainly didn't end there. Many mass media have coexisted with traditional print journalism, but the converged media offered by the Internet has led to some of its biggest changes. Radio emerged as a medium in the 1920s, offering President Franklin D. Roosevelt the ability to address the nation during his fireside chats from 1933 to 1944. Future news icon Edward R. Murrow made a name for himself and CBS News during World War II by broadcasting from rooftops during the Nazi bombings of London and recording as he flew on a bombing mission over Germany. This immediacy gave the audience a sense of being there, something they couldn't get from reading a newspaper, and added a new dimension to reporting. By the 1950s, journalism would extend to the newest medium, television. Many radio news icons, Murrow included, would switch to TV journalism. For the second half of the 20th century, TV news added yet another dimension to reporting with its powerful visual imagery. The civil rights movement benefited enormously from televised coverage. In the 2018 The Atlantic article, When the Revolution Was Televised, author Alexis C. Madrigal wrote, civil rights leaders Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King Jr. understood the medium and the role that the press could play if they chose to highlight the injustices of Jim Crow. But they were not naive. They knew that the country had never taken Black people's word for the horrors that they had endured. It would not be enough to talk about the Black experience of America. White Americans, through their televisions, would have to see, with their own eyes, some of the horrors enacted. And what white Americans saw on the TV nightly news were videos of Black children being sprayed by high-pressure water hoses and attacked by police dogs. TV news continued to evolve with the arrival of CNN in 1980, a 24-hour cable news channel. Before cable news and the Internet, most people tuned into their local and national news every weekday around 6 p.m. for 30 minutes of local news, followed by a national newscast from either ABC, NBC, or CBS. It took a while for all the news all the time concept to catch on. CNN lost money for its first 5 years of operation and was ridiculed as the chicken noodle network for its conspicuous lack of resources. But the network eventually made a name for itself with its coverage of live events as they happened, often scooping the big three networks. CNN gained significant traction with its live coverage of the Persian Gulf War in 1991, and the network's audience grew along with the increasing popularity of cable TV in the 1990s. The 24-hour news cycle introduced by CNN changed what is considered news. Because it is expensive to send reporters out into the field or maintain foreign news bureaus, the much less expensive talking head commentator has become a standard for cable news channels. In some ways, cable news has returned to the partisan press model with conservative-leaning networks like Fox News and liberal-leaning networks like MSNBC, and they're rewarded for doing so. Sean Hannity on Fox News and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC occasionally draw audiences of 3 million or more, while the more middle-of-the-road, but still left-skewing Anderson Cooper of CNN has an average viewership of just under 1 million. Journalism's current evolutionary phase is the Internet, which allows print, radio, and TV news to continually update breaking stories online. Many newsrooms adopt a digital-first mindset, with reporters posting their stories online first, then working on traditional versions. This brings the 24-hour news cycle to all news organizations, as readers, listeners, and viewers do not have to wait for the next printed newspaper or newscast. Online reports also do not have a space or time limitation, so reporters can provide a mix of text, audio, and video. 3 drawbacks to online news is that some reporters rely on email or even text messages to conduct interviews. Critics argue this erodes the journalist-source relationship, as it takes the spontaneity out of interviewing. Reporters can't ask follow-up questions as easily, and it's harder to tell if a source is lying. The sheer amount of information available online also makes it easier for journalists to copy each other's work, both intentionally and unwittingly. The third drawback is also a benefit: media convergence. Print journalists now carry digital cameras to take audio and video, while radio and TV journalists now have to write print-style news reports for their media outlet's website.